Hello, so in this video, I'm going to talk about a common request that we therapists get, which is people wanting to get a letter stating that it's okay for them to have an emotional support animal. So I'm going to give you my 2 cents worth on this in case you're wanting such a letter and just some things to think about. Welcome to the channel. This is Wellness with John, and I'm John Peters. These are resources to help you thrive. So as a therapist, a really common request that I get is someone showing up and wanting a letter stating that it's okay for them to have an emotional support animal. So I want to explain just a little bit about how to think about when a letter like that makes some sort of sense, and some advice that I give people who are pursuing such a letter, because you could waste some money. And I'm going to tell you, if you stay to the end, I'm going to tell you how to potentially save yourself some time and hassle and wasted money in your pursuit for such a letter. So first off, let's talk about what an emotional support animal is and how that differs from a service animal, right? So service animals are animals that have some sort of special training in order to perform some sort of function for someone who needs the animal to help them out in some way. So for example, if a person is visually impaired, they might have a service animal who is trained to be with them and help them, for example, not walk out into traffic. So the animal will actually help them accurately and safely know when they can cross an intersection at a light, things like that. There are all different ways that service animals can be trained, and it's kind of interesting how dogs, for example, can play a variety of different roles for people as service animals. And so what people do when they get a service animal typically is they contact a place that trains those animals, or they buy a suitable animal and then see if it can get accepted into a program to be trained in a particular way. And then typically that animal is going to get trained, and if the program thinks the animal's competent, then the program gives it their own certification for that. And in general, those certifications really aren't mediated by state and federal authorities. So what happens is, if you qualify for a service animal and you get one, then typically the service animal is very obvious to everyone that they're performing as a service animal, and often they're wearing a little vest that says, "I'm a service animal, please don't pet me." And so part of the benefit of that is that the animal gets identified as a special animal. That means that it's going to be treated in special ways. For example, at my local farmer's market, they have a rule that says that you can't bring pets into the area of the market. Now, why would they have such a rule? It makes sense because they don't want to deal with the hassle and potential liability, excuse me, of everybody bringing their dog to the farmer's market and then having dog fights and dogs pooping and peeing everywhere, and people who are scared of dogs being frightened of going to the market and things like that. So they have this rule that you can't have dogs at the farmer's market. However, if you have a service dog, then they would allow that. So if a person walks in and obviously has a service dog, they're going to allow it, right? Now, again, nobody's running up and checking for papers for that, because in general, people aren't exploiting that system too much. Although, I'll be honest, I have known a couple people who just went out and bought a vest for their dog that said, "I'm a service dog," because they wanted to be able to take their dog everywhere. Now, morally, is that okay, really? And practically, would that be okay if all of us just stuck those vests on our dogs? Probably not a great idea, but it's not a common thing that people do that kind of thing. So, but anyway, service dogs are in a special category of dogs that have special training to perform special functions for their owners, and therefore we put them in that special category because we're going to allow them in places that we normally wouldn't allow pets in general, right? Now, this brings us to the question of what's the difference between a service animal and an emotional support animal, right? Now, you could say that an emotional support animal is performing a function for the person, right? One difference is that an emotional support animal performs that function just because they exist and the person owns it. So if I feel more calm when I'm holding my cat, then that cat is helping me be more calm just because it's a cat and I'm holding the cat. That's different from, Fido went to training school for a few months and learned how to do something really special, like alert me when somebody knocks at the door, right? So an emotional support animal is not assumed to have any special training. They perform their function just because you have them, similar to the enjoyment we get out of owning a pet, right? So do I think emotional support animals are a good thing in general? Just so I can reveal my bias here, I actually do. There's good research to show that, especially with furry animals like dogs and cats, that people who own them are less anxious and less depressed. So there's empirical research that supports the idea that people should consider having an emotional support animal for their mental health well-being, right? So my attitude is yes, let's have pets, and let's relate to our pets in ways that not only are good for our pets, but are good for us as well. And I think that pets generally do that for people. Most people find that their lives are enriched in lots of ways by pet ownership, even though lots of people are bad pet owners and there are issues with pet ownership. But part of the point is that there are reasonable limitations in the world for pet ownership and having pets in public spaces. It's reasonable for airlines to consider how animals can be allowed on an airplane. It's reasonable for a landlord to decide whether they want to deal with the extra hassle and liability issues with allowing tenants to have pets. It's reasonable for farmers markets and public spaces to consider how they're going to allow pets, because if you consider, for example, the number of dogs that exist in the world, you could have too many dogs in one place and create some problems that maybe people don't want to deal with, right? Now, again, I'm a dog owner. I love dogs. In general, I would be happy if there were more dogs around, but we're not wanting to throw the gates wide open and just say that there are no reasonable issues for limiting when certain animals are in certain places. Otherwise, there could be chaos and liability issues, right? So what happens is people end up in situations where they, let's say, rent an apartment, and the landlord says, we don't allow pets, but we do allow emotional support animals, right? And so then this raises the question of, what the heck do I do to get my pet to be an emotional support animal, right? So here's the practical issue. There is no such thing as certification at the state level or the federal level where your pet is examined and deemed worthy of being an emotional support animal, and then you get a stamp of approval, and then that's recognized by landlords and airlines and whatnot. It doesn't exist that way. The state of affairs right now is that on a case-by-case basis, whoever is wanting the letter, whether it's a landlord or your airline or whatever, whoever says, I want to see some sort of letter in order to allow you some sort of special allowance in terms of how you're going to have the pet in the space, that's just a case-by-case thing. So there is no standardization of this thing. There's no standard certification, and there's really no standard kind of letter or way that functions. It's just some sort of justification. So here's the basis of those letters and why this gets complicated when you try to get one, okay? So if you come to me and you say, John, write me a letter that says I can have an emotional support letter, right? If I sign my name at the bottom of the letter, I could either be John Joe Schmo that just happens to know you, so no special expertise or way to validate the letter. It's just, here's a letter, somebody signed it, right? That letter technically doesn't validate your justification for having an emotional support letter. It's just like you walking down the street and grabbing a stranger and saying, write me a letter, right? So number two would be an expert who has some sort of opinion that they're a good thing, like me. Like, I generally think that, as I said before, it's good for people to have pets, right? So I could say, I'm John Peters with letters after my name, therefore I'm qualified to have that opinion, but I'm still not necessarily providing a letter that is specific to you, right? I could write a blanket letter that says everybody on the planet deserves to have an emotional support letter and just post it on my website. Therefore, everybody can download it. And here's John Peters with letters after his name saying that everybody can have an emotional support animal, right? Why would that not be sufficient? Because if someone took a critical look at the letter in terms of its validity, they might say, well, this is just John Peters, the therapist, saying everybody ought to have an animal. This isn't John Peters, your therapist, saying that you in particular should have an emotional support animal or some sort of special accommodation, right? So for that type of letter to exist, and that's the type of letter typically that's assumed to function as the letter that supports you having an emotional support animal. And to be clear, it's a letter that says, as an expert who's able to make such an opinion, I have a relationship with this person for whom I'm writing the letter, and I have evaluated them competently and with my expertise. And it is my opinion that given that evaluation, that they should have an emotional support animal, okay? That's the letter. That's how the letter has to be created, and that's how it's supposed to function. So here's the problem. If you just call me up on the phone and you say, John, you're a therapist, I need a letter, will you do that? At that point, I don't know you. I have not evaluated you. And so for me to attest in a letter that I think that you deserve to have an emotional support animal, I would have to evaluate you. I'd have to give you a psychiatric examination, what we call a biopsychosocial evaluation, and come to some conclusion based on that evaluation that you should have an emotional support animal, and I'm going to write this letter that states that. So you can't really just call up a therapist and say, send me a letter, without having some sort of meaningful contact with the therapist or the doctor so that they can attest that there is a specific case of a person needing an emotional support animal, right? And so this is the issue that people get into. And the reality is there are these like letter mills. You can Google this and find them. There are these places that basically say, fill out this questionnaire and send us some money, and we'll give you a digital download of a letter that justifies having an emotional support animal. Now, from the standpoint of, is that really a valid letter? You could quibble with that, because did they really evaluate you in a competent way in order to make a specific statement about you as a specific person, so that from their expertise as the doctor or the psychiatrist or the therapist, that it's their professional opinion that you deserve one? this is questionable ethically of whether you filling out a little quiz really constitutes a valid psychiatric evaluation. I think that's questionable. And that's a reason that I don't run one of those mills, because I don't want to have that relationship with clients, right? Have I written those letters for my actual clients? Yes, but I don't, even though I'm generally supportive of people having these animals, as I said, I'm not so enthusiastic about pretending to have done an evaluation on the whole world, right? I think that's questionable. But here's how you can save yourself some time and money. Again, if you want to use one of those online mills, you can decide for yourself if that's justified and acceptable. But if you're going to go to an actual therapist, here's how to save yourself some hassle. Number one, when you contact the therapist before your initial appointment, you should let them know that your primary goal is to get a letter in support of your having an emotional support animal, right? Because I have had people make an appointment with me and show up, and then in the first session say that in a situation where I'm not willing to write the letter, and then they've wasted their time and the hassle of doing the appointment and the cost of the appointment, right? So for a lot of us therapists, that's not an insignificant cost for an intake appointment. So at that point, you're still at square one without your letter, and you've wasted some time and money, right? So the most important thing is, if you're going to try to get a therapist to write that letter, you should let them know, this is what I want. Would you be able to do that if it's appropriate? Okay. Once you're at that point and the therapist says, yes, I do write those letters, then you're on safer ground in terms of not wasting time and money pursuing the letter. But some of us therapists might say, no, I would not be the person for you to come to see to do that. So go find that somewhere else, right? So that's really the most important thing that you can do to safeguard your time and money is just make sure that you're clear with the provider that you're going to ask to get the letter. You can ask your general practitioner, like your doctor that you normally see for general health issues. Some of those people will write that letter. Some doctors don't do that. So you just have to, again, ask your doctor's office whether or not they provide those letters. So anyway, those are my 2 cents worth on getting a letter to justify having an emotional support animal. Just know that there's really no standardization. There's no real certification for emotional support animals, unlike what there is for service animals. And yeah, I get that people need that justification, because for some places you just can't have your pet with you unless it gets deemed as an emotional support pet, right? But do what you can. I'm supportive of it in general, but good luck to you. So if you enjoy this kind of content, please hit the like button below. And if you have yet to subscribe to the channel, please subscribe, and I'll see you in a future video.